Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of Mask and Mimicry Tabletop Role-Playing Podcast. I am Vellic, and with me as always, is Brand.
Indeed. Hello, everyone.
All right, it's good to be back again to talk about maybe not exactly one of my favorite topics, but one of my favorite topics, D&D, which we play a lot of and we talk about a lot of on here, even though it's not specifically a D&D podcast. But it's one of the games we have the most experience with, and so we talk about it a lot. Yep. And today, or tonight I should say, we're going to be talking about our favorite and least favorite things about Dungeons and Dragons. The whole game. Just fifth ed, whatever we want to talk about, or whatever you want to talk about.
Sure.
Kind of starting that off, as always, we want to hear from people watching, people in chat, but especially in this case, this is going to be a little bit more freeform. I don't have a ton of questions and things for us to ponder as much as we're just going to kind of start riffing off some of the things we do and don't like and kind of talk them out. So, if you have some things, your favorite aspects of Dungeons and Dragons, or your least favorite aspects,
let's start with favorite. It's easier to follow. My favorite thing about Dungeons and Dragons is how free it is to be creative in storytelling specifically. A lot of systems out there are real world setting, and it kind of locks you into making certain choices or following certain ideas. And the freedom that 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons has had for me over the last year now, plus a few months, has been very fun to play with. And so far, the most notable thing between other systems as far as what I like about them all.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of funny because you definitely see criticism of D&D from some people, kind of on the opposite of that, criticizing it for not allowing you to be as creative with the game world and stuff. And I think a lot of that really comes down to your group and your experiences. Who you've played with, what sort of systems you've played, and I definitely think there are some that are freer than D&D. There are some that are intentionally built like that. Some older systems,
right,
like GURPS and stuff, that are literally built to have no preconceived notions of what things are supposed to be like. Whereas D&D comes with a lot of loaded history. There's a lot of things people identify. It's very Tolkien-esque in many regards, and so there's a lot of things where, if you start trying to change something that you don't like about it or that you want to be different, some people can get their underwear in a bunch.
Yeah, their jimmies rustled.
For the most part with our group, I think that holds true, though, that, we don't have anyone that really gets uptight about that sort of stuff. That really is like, no, this is what dwarves are supposed to be. You can't do that.
And I think we all kind of like actually going against that for the most part.
And for the most part, we are people who play our own homebrew content. We don't do modules and stuff. I've been tempted to pick up a D&D module or two, but for the most part, we don't do that. We just make up our own quests and stories and things and our own game worlds. I'm playing running an Eberron game right now, but even that, I change things on the fly. I change anything and everything about that game world that I want to if I decide to. I chose it because I wanted a lot of the stuff that's in that game world to apply in mine. But that's very much not the usual par for the course for us. So I can see how some people who do have the experience of mostly playing either modules or, someone plays a preset campaign setting and they're always like, it must fit with this thing as it's written in the book. Which there are some of those DMs out there. Or the traditionalist people who are real uptight about what things are supposed to be like in D&D and stuff. I can see where some people would come from and not see as much versatility and like world building.
Yeah, when we were playing Werewolf, I got into this trap, I think, where we were set in a real city, in a real state in North America, in Colorado, a city that actually exists, and I found myself needing to like follow the map to a T. Like, these people live here. You don't know who lives there if you've never been there and don't know the city, but the houses, the structures, and everything. It really got me stuck into being in a spot in D&D, at least for me, starting with a fresh slate. Sorry, fresh slate was so freeing.
Yeah, that can really be a problem with some real world games like World of Darkness, things that are based in the modern world. I actually was recently watching a video that someone did on how to run a Vampire the Masquerade game, and they were kind of specifically advising to run the game in a place no one lives, like none of the players live in, because if you run it in like your hometown that you live in, there's gonna be people who are like, oh yeah, you know where the Denny's is? I go hide there, and stuff like that, and you're like, and it kind of becomes almost humorous because you're like, oh yeah, you remember that place where I met my girlfriend, and yeah, I'm gonna go down Fifth Avenue, and it becomes this. Can be this real difficult thing where you're constantly just referring to real stuff and like having to remember where it is. And you don't have that with D&D so much, because I think you can once the game gets going, because people get established in a city and then they start referencing things that you've created, and then you suddenly have to remember them. But you still created it for sure. Something for me that's one of my favorite things. I'm actually going to jump in on one that's both a favorite and least favorite for 5th edition. I like that the game is easier for new players to get into, that they simplified a lot of the rules and they made it so it's, compared to older editions, it's still not the simplest game out there, but compared to older editions, it's easier to explain, it's easier to get people into, and I think that's been a large part of 5th edition's success. It's made it so much easier to introduce, younger players and stuff into the game. On the flip side of that thing, I also don't like how simplified they've made it, because in some areas I do feel like they've gone too far. They've oversimplified certain things in this almost marketing craze to cater the game to new players. They've almost just oversimplified some things until they become generic, and you have to make, like, there's so many homebrew and house rules and stuff for 5e, and there's always been house rules for D&D, but I usually don't feel terribly inclined to do a ton of house rules for D&D. Like in older editions, and with 5th ed, like every time we do a game, I'm like, let's see, what house rules do I want?
And I guess to some extent that kind of tells you that there are some things lacking. There's a lack of depth to some rules, or missing rules in some cases, or just rules that, for the sake of trying to make simple or explain to be simple, lack efficiency at the same time.
And in some cases, they've almost made things more complicated by trying to make them simple, I think, because there's no end. Errata is always a thing.
Yeah.
But there's no end of people on Twitter and stuff trying to get responses and explanations about how things work. And it's like, okay, you wanted to make it simple. How about if you had written better descriptions for all your spells? That would have made it simple without you tinkering with rules.
Yeah. On that note, I do like that the D&D community has access to a very open feedback system from some of the developers, and nice. Even just the community in general of players, sage advice, things like that. Other systems don't have that at all.
Just reminded me of something to add to my list of favorite things. I'll go ahead and go into it, actually. Another favorite, and this is a little bit not D&D, but it is D&D Beyond. The people who took the initiative to build that website and add everything to it and go through the work of compiling that stuff. And, you know, D&D's devs on their part working with them to make that a thing and to enable it. You know, they did D&D a solid service because it is such an invaluable freaking resource.
It is. I think
especially for us playing online.
Yeah, which everyone should be doing these days.
At this point.
So super helpful that they had that. They kind of jumped on the train of like a subscription model that everyone seems to be taking. Things like Adobe and all their software platforms, you know, you used to have to buy each program for a few $100, the license for it, and now it's all subscription stuff. And I think they saw a way to benefit from that, and took the leap, and it worked out really well for them.
Yeah, I still don't love that you have to buy the book separately for full cost. That's the part I don't love. If it was like discounted, I could get behind it more, but they're really not. They're basically full price books, so it gets kind of expensive.
Indeed. You can, however, buy parts of a book. So if you're only interested in a book for like, I just want the monsters from this book because they're cool, I'm not doing anything else, you can grab just the monsters for like a much, much chopped off price.
Yeah, and I do that. I'll go in and buy individual parts of some of the books. And you can share books, which is nice.
Yeah.
If you have a subscription.
Yeah, you can run a campaign, and players in your campaign on D&D Beyond have access to all the stuff you have for your campaign.
Not a sponsor, but
not a sponsor. I think we just did a better D&D ad sponsor than Sam Riegel has ever done. As far as the actual value of the content.
Informative content? Yes. Entertaining? No. What's this thing called again? D&D Beyond, if you're asking the platform we're referring to.
It's D&D Beyond.
D&D. Yeah. Beyond.com. That's it's not an official developer made platform. It's a separate company that created a platform with like all their rules and classes and character information and just everything on it online in a very browsable fashion, so that you can get in there and make characters and just do all kinds of cool stuff. And personally, and I don't think any of us disagree about this, but I think what they're aiming towards is replacing Roll20 as a virtual tabletop for D&D.
Yeah, don't tell Roll20 that. It is also DND, the letter N, not and. But
oh, is it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it is. D&D Beyond, yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a
long-term goal. Yeah. I mean, they just added a way for you to share your dice rolls. You can purchase dice skins for virtual dice on there. They have character sheets and map, like
combat
well,
trackers.
Not maps, but like combat trackers. The only thing they're missing is a shared map and like webcams, and like a shared chat. It's like, yeah, you're like 80% of the way there. So, but yeah, we've discussed that before. If they switch to that and Roll20 does not make some significant improvements, they're gonna be in trouble.
But D&D Beyond just adds, as you were talking about, that inclusiveness, bringing new people in. It makes that resource share so much easier to buy into D&D.
Yeah, it's true, because you can have one person as the DM own all the core books, add some new players to their campaign on D&D Beyond, and then the new players don't have to buy anything. They can just log in there and access all the information. It's real cool. So let's talk a little bit about some things we don't like. I don't want to go through our full like list and
we'll come back around.
Yeah, and then just end on a sour note.
I don't necessarily like that. While they've simplified everything, we talked about kind of homebrew elements. They kind of built the thing thinking everyone's just going to homebrew their stuff, and they don't do a lot of hand-holding in that regard as far as running through things for DMs in particular. Like, they have a whole section on how to build worlds and stuff, which is helpful. But they just expect you... Yeah, they just kind of expect you to homebrew your stuff. So there's a lot of information that they just don't give you that would be useful and helpful, like prices to magic items, because they kind of expect you to not use them at the same time.
Yeah, there is a lot lacking on the DM aspect of D&D stuff. I would agree with that. Like, it is frustrating that, and I think a part of that, well, like the example of magic items, is because they expect magic items to vary so much by campaign setting, by whether you're doing a homebrew setting or you're playing Eberron, where magic items or low level magic items are much more common, or you're playing a campaign setting where magic items aren't common at all. But it feels like they took a cop out. I mean, they could have just given you like 2 or 3 different charts and said, okay, if you want to
Yeah,
play a low magic setting, we recommend doing this. If you want to play a high, these are the costs of magic items you might be able to buy. If you want to do a high magic, then we suggest doing this. So you at least have some ballpark ranges. But instead, they just kind of copped out and went, yeah, just price them, and here's some extremely generic guidelines. That's it. That's all we're giving you.
yeah,
It's just like things that, there are certain things that they know people want to do. Like, about half of all like longer running campaigns, there's somebody that's going to try to craft items or enchant their own items
yeah,
or create spells, and they really don't give you any concrete rules to do that. Now, I do like that they keep some of these things vague, or in that, it's nice to be able to homebrew your own stuff and go, okay, we don't have to use something that they put out. But it's also frustrating when there's nothing.
yeah,
So, you can always add a caveat like, this is a suggested method for doing this. Do whatever you want. That's fine. But when you're just like, it's too hard to really tell you what to do, and we don't want to pigeonhole you, so we're just going to give you nothing. That does get frustrating.
yeah. It's come down to people, players, DMs coming up with their own rules, either sharing them or putting them in books to sell on Patreon or something like that.
Yeah, it kind of actually goes back to that topic of oversimplification, where I have to sit here and go, are they just making it more difficult for DMs, like like they made it easier for new players but harder for new DMs because they don't give them guidelines in certain things? Or was there thinking that it's easier for new DMs because they don't give them guidelines in certain things so they can make it up and do whatever they want?
Yeah.
And I'm like, but at the same time, I feel like newer DMs normally aren't that comfortable with just making things up on the fly.
Yeah, they'd rather have info, I think, to go off of. Anything that they can just put together very quickly, call their friends, be like, hey, let's play D&D for 6 hours today or tomorrow. I've got something. And it's going to be much more helpful for them to know what they're doing up front, or to have hands and guides in their hands.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But for me, we've talked about this before, so we won't have to belabor it too long. But one of the things I don't like is the alignment system.
Yes.
And this goes back to first edition, I believe. It's been forever since I played it, so I don't really remember much of first edition. I only played it once. But the alignment system is ancient, and it's just not very useful, in my opinion. It serves as mostly as a kind of useful guideline for newer players, and it kind of serves to give a general idea to share with someone of what your character's alignment is or their general approach to things, as a refresher for yourself, maybe. But I feel like there's so many much better systems in other games that I feel like the only reason they keep alignment in there is because it's a traditional part of D&D and they don't want to break out of it.
Yeah, that's fair criticism. I agree. It needs an overhaul.
At the very least, if they are afraid of breaking out of that traditional aspect of the game, it would be nice for them to keep alignment but make it more detailed. add like some sub factors to alignment, so it's not just you know uh, the current selection. But instead, they could break it up into different aspects and say, okay, your alignment system, you will choose between where you lie on two spectrums: chaos versus law, good versus evil, and then have some different subcategories under that, or some things that you can pick that's a little bit more detailed, a little bit more nuanced. And then also you could have that as an optional thing, so that if people don't want to do that, you could say, don't do it. Just
Yeah.
don't use the more detailed alignment system. We're just offering it to you.
And maybe they're leaning towards doing that eventually because they've already started that process of breaking from tradition with the racial, or now I forget how they're referring to it
Ancestries.
now. Ancestries, yeah. To give races of your D&D world more flexibility and less stereotype.
Yeah, I think they're definitely feeling the call from people to get away from the kind of stereotyped and borderline kind of racially problematic descriptions and traditional descriptions of different character races and such. I mean, first and foremost, without getting into it too much, but the fact that they call them races to begin with is a little messed up. It's a little inaccurate at best. Like, no, these are completely different species.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really gel with our actual use of the term race. And then it is problematic also because a lot of them are based, D&D wise, are based in other types of fiction, older fiction, like Tolkien and stuff, and other lore, and a lot of them often get compared with actual, like, real world races and stuff, where people draw parallels and they're like, I feel like this race is supposed to be has traditionally always been drawing some rather racist parallels with this group, and we would like to get that out of the game. And I
Yeah.
feel like they're starting to feel a lot of pressure, rightly so, to hopefully update some of that. And which they, like you said, they release some stuff to give players options to do more ancestry stuff like that. And I recently started playing Zweihander on twitch.tv/TT2KB
Indeed.
every other Sunday. And we that game, Zweihander, uses an ancestry system, and it's really solid. I mean, you just play a character that is most characters are human, but in that game, but you can also play dwarves, elves, and such, or people from those ancestries, and it works pretty well without some of the glaring issues that fall into D&D.
Yeah. Another thing, moving on, I guess,
Though it does still change your physical stats a little bit, which I know is
that
part of
makes
an issue
sense.
some people have.
It kind of makes sense to some extent. But one of the other things I kind of don't like, kind of gearing or switching gears over to combat, is, and it's part of the lack or the simplification of things, is the lack of like real combat maneuvers, or how all the norms of combat maneuvers you expect in other systems or even previous systems have been bundled into a single kind of check, and no longer does those things. It's kind of narratively driven, I guess, to some extent, as a DM, rather than having specific rules on it.
That is a little frustrating because they really kind of, to some extent, they killed a little bit of the interest and playability of classes like the fighter. Where older editions, you could get feats that would allow you to do different abilities like cleave and great cleave. You could cut through multiple people at a time. And don't even get me into 4th edition, because while I generally didn't like it, it really, I mean, it basically gave fighters spells, except they were just weapon abilities. But you could do all kinds of crazy stuff with them. And fifth edition kind of really backtracked on that and was like, no, they're going to have an attack. They're going to take their sword and they're going to stab you with it. Are they going to have different maneuvers they can do with it? Not really.
Only 1/3 of them.
Yeah. You can have spells if you want. If you really want to go into that, you can specialize. If you specialize as a protector, you will have an ability you can do with your shield. That's it. That's all you get.
Yeah. An attack twice, 3 times, and then 5 times later in your life.
Which I will say, I don't think they have to have a ton of options for that, because I do think 4th edition was the wrong way to do it. 4th edition, they tried to give everyone abilities that were basically like spells. The fighter, you could have like a leap ability where it's video game like you'd like leap ahead and smash into somebody, or like an AoE spin attack, all kinds of stuff. And I was like, I'm not playing a fighter to memorize spells, okay?
Yeah.
And I like playing a caster, but I'm like, this is just, it felt too video gamey, and not like what I was really wanting. But I like cleave. I like having a feat, or having the option. Because, back in the day, in older editions as a fighter, that was one of the perks of a fighter. You would get additional feats. Almost no one else got a bunch of feats, but you would have feats out the wazoo, and you could pick them to do different things. You could pick them so that you could use a net and like trap people. You could pick it to become a really good grappler. Have grappling options and stuff. And that's a lot more restricted in 5e
anymore. Yeah, there is a grapple that you can do as a skill check, but it doesn't do a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can like pin someone after it, if you really want to. And grapple is real powerful, but you don't have a lot of like options for things to do after that. And not to mention the fact that I don't see why anyone would ever disarm anyone in 5e. I've seen some people talk about how it's still useful, and I don't know how it is, because they literally just drop their weapon right next to them, and it's a free action to pick it up. So I'm like, all right. I've still yet to have anyone explain that to me in a way that makes me go like, I should start disarming people now.
Super situational. Like if you're lucky, you can make it work in your favor if the right abilities get used following your turn.
Well, it would be different if you had some way to retrieve it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't. That's one thing I did like about like the new Zweihander game I started playing. It's my first foray into it, but you can do an attack and a crap, I forget what they're called now, but you can basically do an attack and a maneuver and a move all in the same turn. So you can attack someone, then you could do a maneuver to disarm them or knock them down or do whatever you wanted to do that's not counted as an attack. And then you can move away if you want to, or move into engagement and tackle them and then stab them. Whereas in D&D, it's a little less dynamic for fighters, because you're generally like, I walk in, I stab again. Next turn.
That's it. I'm going to stay right here. Yeah. I'm not moving.
Where I want to be.
Yeah, despite the lack of those types of generic maneuvers, not just for fighters, but melee-based maneuvers that anyone could try to do, their simplification of them actually made combat go faster, which I think is only a nice thing, because my combat still seemed to run a very long time, even with all the advantage versus disadvantage process that things get boiled down into.
Yeah, and I actually do like the advantage and disadvantage system. I know some people don't. Older D&D, you had so many modifiers to stack in there and add in. I got a +1 from this, and then a +2 from this, and yada yada. Oh, I got a situational flanking bonus. And I like the way advantage and disadvantage works. It's way more seamless. It's a lot smoother. However, one of the things I don't like, because it gets into the topic of how long combat takes. I like combat in D&D. I like having a good fight in D&D. I don't even mind spending an entire session in battle in D&D. I don't. However, one of the things I don't like is that because Let me say that one of the reasons I don't like this is because combat still takes forever, and it's going to. There's just no way around it. In any tabletop game, combat takes forever. I don't care what game it is; it takes forever. Only reason it can be shorter in some games like in World of Darkness and stuff is because those are more narrative games where you're really encouraged to just wrap the fight up and go, yeah, you win. If it's if the players are winning, just go, yeah, you win. There, it's over. But with D&D, the tally, the damage, the lingering effects after the battle, all of that matters because it is a much more combat-focused game. It's not a narrative-focused game. And so, what I don't like about D&D is the forced combat gauntlet. And by that I mean, as the DM, you usually have to force players, especially when they're not at a really high level. You have to force the players to go through multiple battles and encounters just to drain their abilities. Because if you throw one big fight at them, either they're going to nuke the crap out of it and absolutely wipe the floor with your enemies, or you super risk wiping them because you threw something too big at them. Now, when they're at higher level, like really high level, like over 10 and stuff, you can sometimes do that. You can sometimes throw a really big mob at them and just one, and they just deal with it, and then it's still a challenging fight. But for most of gameplay, you're expected to put them in a dungeon. They hit a trap. They have some kind of an obstacle to get over. They fight one or two smaller battles where they use some of their spells and abilities and some health. Then they have a climactic fight that's a challenge now because they don't have every level 3 spell at their disposal. If you throw me in a random encounter in the middle of the night, I'm just going to throw 3 fireballs into it and nuke the crap out of everything. Because I've got all my spells. I'm going to sleep after this. To hell with it. And so this becomes a problem because those fights take so freaking long that you're now kind of, like, as the DM, I find myself sitting there going like, all right, if I just throw this this is what I want for the final battle. If I just throw this at them, they're going to destroy it. So let's see. What am I going to do to weaken the players before they get here?
Yeah.
And then
you definitely have to be careful with timing and stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of tedious. And I don't 100% hate it either because combat and some of those areas are things that I like to do as a player. We're very role play focused, but I also really enjoy doing combat with my character, destroying enemies and laughing on their corpses as I stand there.
That's why you have spells.
Yeah. Exactly. I love getting cast fireball and stuff. That's so fun. But as a DM, it can be kind of frustrating to just have to be like, all right, let's figure out how I'm going to balance this by weakening them. And before anyone says it, throwing them in one big fight that has multiple waves is the same freaking thing. It's not different. It's the same thing. You just you just packed it all into one spot.
Basically. Now, that's could be very. I won't dislike it, but it's on the lower end of, not the greatest thing, but you can't really avoid it.
Yeah, like I said, I don't hate it, and it wouldn't be as annoying as it sometimes is if combat didn't take forever. But then you get in this huge slog where one of your game sessions, if you're really throwing them into like a dungeon or something, one of your game sessions isn't them going into and finishing the dungeon. It's them getting into and getting like halfway through the challenges of the dungeon and then just being like, all right, we're going to wrap up in the middle of this hallway.
Yeah.
Or you got to the final fight, cliffhanger, because we don't have time to go through a 3-hour battle right now.
Can everyone stay for 2 more hours? Yeah, no? Okay.
I have another thing I don't like.
Yeah, go for it.
That is slightly combat related. Sort of, not really. and that is unrealistic power imbalance. And this is you'll actually, I guess you'll find that most of the things I don't like are things I also kind of like. They're complicated. It's not an easy relationship, because I do love D&D, so I like a lot of these things also, but I also dislike some of them, and sometimes the same ones. And that is like, everyone likes the power fantasy to some degree, being like, I have my powerful wizard who's level 10 and super unstoppable. But especially as a DM, but sometimes also as a player, it does get frustrating when, like, compared to NPCs and enemies in the city and stuff, like, your characters are just infinitely better than them. Even if the players, even at like level 6, your characters have been adventuring for like 3 months. They're level 6. Somehow in those 3 months, they are now infinitely more powerful than 90% of the people in your main city,
who've gone through years of hardship and labor to get where they are.
The town guards, the town guards, they can't stop them. And that's the thing, though. Because, and this is a bit of an issue. It's an issue for me because I have a very logical brain. That's my brain thrives on logic and making sure that things match up and that they make sense. Yeah. And so, like, in my last game I ran, not the current Eberron game, my last game I ran, the guards in the cities were all like CR 1/4, and then they'd have like some commanders that were like equivalent of like a level 3 or so character. But for the most part, they're all very low level because they would be. Like, you can't tell me that the city guard is going to be, each one of them is going to be able to take out an entire camp of goblins by themselves. If they were, there would be no goblins. And so it's hard for me to justify those things in my brain sometimes. I can usually ignore it because, I play the game, so I have to ignore it. It's just a thing. Like, but the area where it does become problematic for me is actually the player arrogance. Because players very quickly in D&D kind of become arrogant about how amazing their character is.
We're basically gods now.
Yeah, we're basically gods now. And I can't say anything. I'm guilty of it. I am absolutely guilty of it. You give my character Fireball, and I'm like, ha! Who wants to fight me? I don't care. I'll destroy you all. It's our dog came to say hi.
Just not undead zombie beholders.
Go. Yeah, none of that. But, like, we go back into a town after I start hitting like level 5, level 6. I go into a town. I'm like, guards start to give me crap, and I'm like, no, sir. You're not doing that to me. I'm a level 5. I could just roast half of your guards. I don't care.
I have friends in high places now.
And I try not to. I have to actively try not to let that be a thing. And be like, no, don't.
Yeah.
But it still is a little bit because I know. I'm like, no, I could kill the crap out of most of these guards.
Yeah, and that's something I think DMs can overcome with the right planning, or specifically, maybe not even the right planning, the right setting, and the right framing of your story. Sometimes things just happen so quickly, and you go from checkpoint A to checkpoint B to checkpoint M in a very quick time frame, and not enough time really passes to make it seem logical.
Well, and I think it's, like I said, the part of it that tends to bug me is the player arrogance more than the lack of logic to it. Because, like, we're fortunate that we don't, in our current group, have, like, any murder hobos. We don't have anybody who's just like, oh, I have Fireball. I want this thing from the shopkeeper, so he better give it to me, or I'm just going to start killing people. We don't have anybody like that. But it still comes through sometimes when people are doing stuff and they're interacting with NPCs, and they're like, I know, I'm like my character is way better than any of these people, and it kind of comes through a little bit, and I'm like, because it's the part of it that frustrates me is like, sometimes is that they know and I know that none of those NPCs pose a threat to those characters. And I'm like, I still kind of want them to a little bit. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
they need to have a way. And as the DM, I could really make it happen if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But I generally don't want to punish people unless they go really AWOL. Like, if people really start with their characters, which we generally don't have a problem with it. But, if people really start doing that, then I'll find a way to punish them in game or in story, or to reinforce like what you did was maybe wrong. Depending on what it is, like try to reinforce like, yeah, you may be the asshole here. But I feel like there's other games where that's not as much of an issue.
No, definitely not.
And because it has to do with character advancement. Your characters get more powerful. In D&D, there's huge scale.
Very linear. Yeah.
You shoot up in power. In other games, you may do that, but still not really be that much more powerful than the average mortal being.
Yeah, and in a lot of other systems, maybe not a lot of. If you look at the White Wolf systems in particular, there's a cost incurred into gaining power. Always, they don't really offer a. I'm sure someone has done it. They don't really offer a milestone-based experience process in White Wolf. Like D&D has an option to do that. So if you play experience gains in D&D, there is a cost there as well. You're spending experience points just to level, but in White Wolf, you're spending experience points in very specific things to level.
Yeah.
And you really start playing more of your character rather than the power creep.
Yeah, it levels you out a little bit more, or makes it a little bit more of a gradual increase.
Yeah.
And also the fact that there are things that make that even things out, or can, like in Vampire the Masquerade, you are infinitely more powerful than humans. But if you go around showing your ass and really tick off a human, they can buy incendiary ammo. It's very easy to acquire in real life. Now, of course, the storyteller can rule and be like, no, this is the world of darkness. They don't allow you to get that. But, just saying, in theory, they could. Or they might be able to find out where you live and literally set it on fire, which for a vampire in the middle of the day, not good.
There are a lot of narrative flaws that exist in the world that can turn into mechanical issues.
Yeah, and D&D, you get down to like, okay, what do I do? Do I just set the town guard on them because they broke some laws and stuff? I guess that's about my only recourse. I have some kind of really powerful bounty hunter that's going to chase them down now. The average person isn't doing anything to them.
No.
And so that frustrates me sometimes. Sometimes.
I had something else. I forgot it.
I know I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't getting there to it yet. There's another dislike. I don't remember, though.
I could throw out gatekeeping. This has less to do with the game and more with the community. You may be the asshole here. That would make for the nerdiest on Reddit. Yeah. God, I hate those posts because they're always the asshole. Always. But at least the ones I see anyway. But yeah, gatekeeping is more of a community issue. And it's something that, fortunately, again, we don't have. We have a good group. Or good two groups, really. We don't have anybody that's just real stuck up about that. But, I've seen the posts from people. I've seen the things that some traditionalist and, old school D&D players say to other people about what is and is not allowable in D&D and everything, and they can shove that stuff right up their rear. That's all I got to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are rules. They exist, and they can be broken if you wish to.
There's just some toxic community elements that are frustrating at times. Definitely not the majority of players. Just some freaking people.
Yeah.
You figure out what your other negative was?
No, I haven't. Must not have been that negative.
Racial stats. I have a list, so I'm actually almost done with my list. So I hope you figure it out soon.
I'll keep thinking.
Racial
Oh,
stats.
I do remember it.
Awesome.
Go ahead, though. It might tie into that. We'll see.
Especially, well, one, I mean, it does. We kind of talked about this earlier, and it does kind of make sense for racial stats to affect your like physical abilities and stuff. Your choice of ancestry or species to affect your ability scores and stuff to some degree. Especially, because I can see, hey, it does perhaps make sense that if elves are supposed to be tall and really lanky, as they are traditionally described anyway in older school D&D and stuff, then yeah, maybe they are going to be prone to dexterity or whatever and not strength. But it can also be very limiting, and I like using it sometimes, and sometimes I really don't. What I really don't like is the super generic human stats. I hate how every single this isn't just a D&D criticism. I hate how every single tabletop game wants humans to be generically good at everything. It's stupid.
There you go. Stupid.
Why are humans the baseline? Why are we just pretty good at everything? I'm like, I feel like there's some of these things we're not good at.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned it before, and we've heard it elsewhere. It's likely because we are human, and it's just trying to get people to play human when all they want to do is play elves and dwarves and other cool stuff.
And I feel like it's also a little bit of wanting to use humans as the baseline. They want to use. They feel like humans need to be, there needs to be a baseline that's just kind of generally good at everything. And I'm like, why? Why does there need to be that? If you want to do that, why don't you make a couple different types of humans, like humans with different sub-ancestries and stuff, and have them have different stat selections or recommended stat bonuses or something. There's a lot of different ways you could do it and still not make humans boring as crap.
Which I think 5th edition had the opportunity to do that when they came out with their human description in their book. There are a lot of different ethnical descriptions of their humans in there,
and nameless
from different regions. Yeah, like they could have totally associated substats and stuff with those, and they just didn't.
Yeah, and it's a conversation we had recently that I kind of got from someone else's post on online about how maybe stats should be more determined by character background than by their ancestry, or maybe a mixture of the two. Have one give a +1 in general and be like, okay, that's a minor adjustment, that's fine, that's less objectionable. And then backgrounds, their actual thing that you've been raised and or trained to do, should maybe determine some of your stats. If you've spent all your time as a sailor, that probably affects your your abilities a little bit more than just your skill. But as it is, it doesn't have much impact. I think Traveler did that way back when. Oh, okay. Do what?
That did segue actually, not horribly, into my idea, which ties into backgrounds. For 5th edition, backgrounds are a very in short supply method of providing roleplay flavor to your characters in the character creation process in the book. A lot of roleplay in D&D is just based off of your own interest in role-playing in D&D.
There's a lot of people that don't do it at all in groups. I mean,
it's very heavily combat first, everything else second, and third and fourth. I wish there was more role play, even if it's optional stuff. More emphasis on it in the book. Add 20 more pages to your already 400 page long book. I'm not going to care. Put some things in there to really help influence that.
I
Make it
agree
more prominent.
completely. I love backgrounds. That is one of the changes they made in 5th edition that I absolutely love. 4th edition, 3rd edition, 2nd edition, none of them had backgrounds as a concept. They were even worse into, like you said, focus on combat and mechanics and systems, not on really fostering roleplay or helping people think about it. They started and ended with alignment, and that was pretty much it. And I would love to see more things to help guide and help people shape backgrounds and stuff for their characters, especially because I have to say I think having some stuff in the player's handbook would be nice, but I think especially where this needs to take place is they need to start adding this stuff into campaign guides.
Yeah.
Having a section in Eberron that helps you to determine different roleplay aspects for your character. And I actually think, if I remember correctly, that Matt Mercer did this with his Guide
to Wildmount.
Yeah, his Guide to Wildmount. I believe there's a whole section in there for helping to figure out if you're from this area, how might that affect certain aspects of your character's background and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things to maybe consider adding to your character's backstory or how you roleplay them because of some of those things. And I think more books should do that.
Yeah, especially now with the popularity of not just Critical Role but other channels. I forget their names. Such good roleplay flavor D&D Twitch channels and stuff. There's a lot more roleplay happening out there with their D&D settings, and now's the time to really start re-emphasizing that and bringing in not just your combat crowd, but a new crowd of people who are getting much more engaged in this.
And that is to say, again, if combat in D&D is your jam and roleplay isn't, that's fine. There are groups that they just focus on combat and stuff, and that's fine. And for the most part, the game already focuses on that stuff. It already provides things for it. And as we've kind of pointed out in some cases, perhaps has backed away a little bit too much from some aspects of it and needs to add some more different attack types and things. Not going back to 4th edition, but let's give the fighter something, okay? Give them cleave back. But give a couple feats or something you could do. But for the most part, combat and mechanics wise, that stuff's already in the book. That's the majority of what's in there. It's other features that would be nice, like custom magic items and how to brew your own potions.
A little more forethought into spell descriptions. They're not bad by any means compared to other systems that lack entire rules for how to do things, but it would be nice to not go to a Reddit forum or Sage Advice and have the answer be, well, does it say it does that? No. Well, then it doesn't do that.
And one of the areas they kind of skimped that's semi-related, it's mechanical, but it's semi-related to roleplay a little bit more than combat and stuff. Tools. 5th edition added a ton of tools to the game and then did nothing with them. Just added all these tools that you could do stuff with. There's cooking
item tools.
Yeah. There's cooking tools. There's masonry tools. There's herbalism kit. Okay, what do you do with an herbalism kit? It doesn't tell you. It doesn't really give you any significant suggestions. As a DM, it doesn't give you any lists of things they can find. I had a character in my current game who kept wanting to use his herbalism kit to scavenge for herbs. And so I finally went and made a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of herbs for him to find and what their values are and what potions they could be used to make. All by myself. Because he wants to use a thing that the frickin' book gave him. And I'm like...
With the exception of a music item the disguise kit and the thieves tools. Everything else, you can use them, but they're so superfluous, they're meaningless in the scope of what you're doing.
Yeah, the creative ones, at least, I mean, that those are pretty blatant in how you do it. Okay, painting
Mhm.
tool. Okay, I know how I can paint stuff. Cool.
Yeah.
That's at least obvious. But like for all the tinkerer's tools, the masonry kit, they've started to add things, but some of them they even make class features. You know, they went and go, all right, well, we're going to make some tinkerer tool stuff and add it to this class. And then I'm like, well, what if somebody else has tried to tinker stuff? They have tinker's tools, and
Yeah.
you know, and it's. And then their idea of adding it is, all right, we added 3 things you can make with this, and I'm like, that's not much. That's not much at all. That's
You've got
almost
cooking
nothing.
tools. You're out camping in the middle of the night. Okay, roll for cooking. Okay.
You say that, but I do that.
You burn your food. It's not edible. Okay, I'll eat my rations then.
I have been sorely tempted to make a character proficient with cooking tools just to do that.
But like endgame, it's really meaningless. It's a moment of funniness,
Yeah.
but it doesn't actually provide towards the story, I don't think.
Well, and what actually makes me annoyed by that, like they actually added a feat for you to do that and actually get benefit from cooking tools. So that's kind of nice. But cooking tools themselves are stupid as a tool, in my opinion, because I've always included cooking checks in my game if someone wants to cook. If someone actually wants to go take the effort to do that, I will make them make checks for it. It's called survival.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to
There's a skill that
survive,
does that.
you got to make checks to cook stuff and not poison yourself. So I've just always made a survival check to do that. And I'm like, especially because you're usually doing it camping. I'm like, so how is it not
Yeah.
survival? Why do you? Okay, now you're bringing in a different tool to do it. I mean,
The only
sure.
thing that matters is, are you proficient with it? If yes, you get a bonus. If not, you don't get a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a different option to get the same proficiency bonus, but
Yeah.
it's a little
Basically,
lacking.
make things you have mean something. This is what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Everything. Make everything that you have an item of, make it mean something.
I mean, I like that they added the tools. I just wish they, you know, for the ones that should do something, give us some detail so that I as the DM don't have to make it up. Yeah. I don't really want to have to go make a list of herbs for someone to find, but I did it because they have a freaking herbalism kit and they should be able to find herbs. And then make potions, because there's a potion maker's supplies, there's an alchemy kit, but then it doesn't tell you anything about how they should make potions. And I'm like,
on the note of leaving
it's like,
things,
here's a box this big about making potions. Great, that's useful.
yeah. On the note of leaving things up to the DM, I don't like when mechanical things relevant to any character are left up to DM's remembrance of how to do them or when to do them. And I'm talking about wild magic in this case, but not shading you or anything. Just I don't like the spell description at all, and that it's constantly left up to, I think maybe not wild magic, but the thing after, Tides of Chaos with wild magic. Like the whole wording of it is just so convoluted, and DMs have a lot to do. I would be in the same case and not remember things half the time, and not give it the credit it might deserve, or give it too much credit. And I'd rather it come down to a mechanical rule that determines whether your class features do something or not.
Yeah, I never remember wild magic, and if they want it to be a rare thing, they could just as easily throw it onto a D100 instead of a D20 and say every time you cast a spell, roll a D100. If you get a 5 or below, something happens.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so and maybe we need to do that. I don't know, because I always forget wild magic. Every now and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. I need to do that.
That's I homebrewed that in my campaign to do that, to attach the die roll on every first level spell of a sorcerer or higher. I did increase the percentage, but I still attached it mechanically to the spell roll itself. You have to roll every single time you cast a spell.
Yeah. So let's end off on some more positive things. We started off on
Yes.
some of our favorite aspects of D&D. Let's go ahead and round it off with a few more favorite things.
I really like, and this is very nondescript, more RP story narrative. I like the inclusiveness of all D&D world into one setting that they've done. Forget the term for it, but your Eberron setting, your Faerun setting, all of these locations now all exist in the greater D&D universe mythos somewhere in the universe out there, and I really like that they've brought it all in.
At least in theory, if you want it to.
Yeah.
You can have a multiverse of
it is officially
universes.
A multiverse, and they're
yeah, and that's how some people that's how I've always liked to view it. Like essentially, kind of viewing the material plane is just full of planets, and the different campaign settings are just different planets that are in the material plane. And they're so physically removed that generally you can't travel between them. But in theory, maybe you could if you really wanted to, or if something real screwy happened.
Yeah, I like that they officialized that element and kind of just brought it under and gives DMs and players more food for thought if they ever want to do something that integrates and connects multiple worlds.
Well, especially when there are some settings, that really play into the plane hopping and stuff. And really, so there are some campaign settings that really go into that. One of the things that I really like about 5th edition, or not 5th edition, D&D in general, is, and this is actually hard for me to describe per se, but the types of characters. Like when I was trying to think of things that I really like about D&D, that was something that came up. It's like types of characters. The types of characters that I can make, that other people can make. I really enjoy a lot of the characters that happen in these settings. But it's very hard for me to pin down exactly what and why to explain what I mean, I really enjoy it in other settings too, like vampire. But it's a setting thing. It's just the environment itself, the types of characters you can make with the classes and stuff that are available in D&D with the wizards and or warlocks and the different traditional ancestries and stuff. And some of that established, I think part of it is also that some of that established lore that we kind of have and share from the things that D&D is originally based on. So I can understand in a small degree why some people get a little bit irritated when people go changing certain things. Just because, they need to back off. But just because some of that does kind of craft, I think, the environment that helps to have some of these characters I really like that get created and stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, got this really awesome I've got this really awesome human wizard that has all these really cool abilities and stuff. And perhaps some of it is a bit of nostalgia because I started with D&D and I've played D&D for ages. But I don't know. I just feel like in some cases for some other tabletop games, I don't necessarily end up with a character that I like as much as some of my D&D characters.
That's fair.
Not as
magic
important to me.
Might be the word you're looking for.
It has a certain magic to it.
It kind of it describes everything and solves everything in D&D. I do like that all of Dungeons and Dragons is constantly and still evolving towards better places, inclusiveness, but also just cool things that they're still adding, new features that they're coming up with, or trying to bring back old things that did work and getting rid of things now that don't necessarily work, and to just try to make things still more efficient as time is going on. It's not something that's just stopped and 5th edition is the best and end goal of everything. It's still constantly iterating on itself.
And I will say that's definitely a 5th edition thing. They did not do that very much with the older editions. It was what it was. And they still, I do agree with some people who criticize D&D, saying that it has not moved enough and that it needs to change and adapt in certain ways and fix some things that they've worked on in the recent years. But 5th edition's been out for a while now, and
Quite a
they've
while.
been real slow to come out with some solutions to some things. I think one of the reasons they've started rolling out some of these changes is because they're probably getting ready to start pushing for 6th edition in the near future. And by near future, I mean next several years.
Yeah.
I'm sure they've still got the ability to milk 5th edition for a bit. But inevitably, there's always a next edition because eventually they got to put out new books or they get no more money.
That's kind of their business model is Dungeons and Dragons and
Yep.
new
And
books.
I've been playing. I've played 1st edition before, but I've been playing actively since 2nd edition. I'm not that old, and that's just what it was. I remember, it used to be like it used to feel like a new edition every 5 years. It was like 2nd edition, and a couple years later, like, oh, hey, 3rd edition, and then, oh, wait, it's been 3 years. They now came out with 3.5, and then 4 years after that, oh, hey, 4th edition is out. And we've had 5th edition for a while now. So
Yeah.
I think they've started putting some of this stuff out to see how it's received so that they can start working on, okay, we want to do the next edition. What do we want to overhaul? What do we need to build in? Which I hope that's the case because there are some of these things they do need to build into the actual game system whenever they do move on to a new edition.
Yeah, like in the player's handbook edition of a new game edition, not just Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is great that it's there, but
It's an awesome book.
it just kind of feels optional at the same time. Like the whole book feels optional.
Yeah, some of those changes of having them put out as like official options is great, but they need to be a part of the core experience, not just a thing. Or just print glorified art books with words like they did with 3.5. And there's so many. The older editions had so many like just random source books and things that were like not canon at all. That they haven't really done with 5th edition. That I mean, they kind of still have, I guess, but they put them in their online shop and stuff, and they're not like on bookshelves as much, which is nice. My last thing that I have that I like about D&D, my last favorite thing. It's not really all the things I like, but my last favorite thing about D&D, because we already kind of talked about character development, as I mentioned, that's actually a mixture of a thing I don't like and a thing I do like. I do like my characters become super powerful. It's awesome. But as a part of that, the heroic journey. I've played a lot of different types of D&D games, and I've played evil campaigns. But to me, and I think to a lot of people, the basics of D&D is around the heroic journey. It's around playing characters who become adventurers, who become heroes, who go out and they defeat evil and they help people. Knowing how people play their characters, they're usually sometimes jerks about it. But in general, they do a lot of good and they are heroes. You have this epic, heroic journey that you embark on. And that's extremely enjoyable for me. That's something I like to play. I never get tired of playing it. It's fun. I like to go in with other people and play, since we like to role play, usually a troubled hero, but and I do like to play the odd evil character as well, but for the most part, that's what I like the most about D&D is going into that, that heroic epic saga. Going and destroying the One Ring to save all of Middle Earth. That's what I want to do.
Exactly, and it's very much emphasized in the book. In most settings you watch, like Critical Role especially, like even this campaign, they didn't start out that way, but they are inevitably heroes of the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's how the game development works. I mean, because your characters just keep getting so powerful. And I don't remember. I don't think fifth edition does it, but I think one of the older editions even describe them and their content like in tiers. Like there's a certain level, like level 1 through 10, where or like level 1 through 5 where you're like a local adventurer. You're probably just going around the town doing stuff around that one area. Levels like 6 to 10, you're like probably going to be like renowned within like a kingdom. And then above 10, you're like renowned within the world. And then above like 15, you are plane hopping and doing stuff in other worlds and all kinds of stuff, stuff that affects things globally. Because that's just how the tiers of power in stuff in D&D goes. I mean, by the time you're level 15, most things on this world cannot stop you.
Yeah. You're not joking. Like, you get to challenge ratings that high, and they don't exist in the normal plane.
So, do you have any other last favorites?
No. I'm sure I could come up with several, but I think we exhausted a good list.
A little bit. How about you, chat? Any final favorite or least favorite things about Dungeons and Dragons before we head off for the evening? As a reminder for people, I had to think for a minute. Yeah, I will continue my Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic stream Friday and Sunday. And then next Sunday, I won't have my stream because every other Sunday I do Zweihander now live play on Tabletop to Keyboards Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/TT2KB. I feel like there's something else I'm forgetting to announce, but don't know what it is.
You're here Wednesdays.
Yep, every other Wednesday for this show. And let's see, the man with no screen name. It was bonkers for rules and such, but there's a certain charm to the zaniness of 3.5. Yeah, I actually have a certain fondness for second edition, because I think in part because that's the first edition I really ever. Well, technically I did play first edition first, but we didn't know what we were doing, and so I really cut my teeth on second edition, and second edition was really broken. And I do have a certain fondness for how broken it was. Like, you talk about combat focus, we were just like doing crazy, super min-max stuff way back when. And while I'm not a min-max player now at all, I do still have a certain fondness for that. I really liked third edition and 3.5 as well. I really didn't care for fourth ed very much at all. No redeeming qualities. Now, there were some aspects of it that were good, but for the most part, just not great. But I think we're well over our time, so I guess that's pretty much it for us for tonight. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. See you all around, and remember, if it's a treasure chest, it probably is not a mimic.